Hey folks, how you doing? My name is Tim Black. Welcome to the Tim Black Show. Today I have a great guest. I'm looking forward to this because I met this gentleman at Politicon a few years back, and he had a book out, Keeping It Real, and I didn't get a chance to bring him on. I want to rectify that today. Dr. Elwood Watson. Dr. Watson, how you doing, brother?
Doing good. How you doing, guy?
Man, I'm doing fantastic, man. And I'd like to jump right into it, Dr. Watson. And could you, first time on the channel, could you tell people a little bit about yourself? I think you can do a better job of explaining your background than I can.
I appreciate it, Tim. I'm Dr. Elwood Watson, and I'm a professor of history, African American studies, gender sexuality studies, and pop culture at East Tennessee State University. I'm an author, public speaker, and writer. I contribute to various publications, including Medium. I write on Substack, former writer for Diverse Education, and I do writing for other publications from time to time as well. So I guess you could say, if you wanted to describe me, I'm an author, professor, writer, and public intellectual.
Amazing, amazing, and definitely someone we've been looking forward to talk to, and I think the audience is going to get a lot out of this. What I will do is put a link to your Substack when this is done, Dr. Watson. I'd like to jump in because, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Watson wrote this great article, and it grabbed me because of the timeliness of it, and also, of course, the subject matter. The title was "The Tulsa Massacre: White Fragility, Reparations, and Speaking Truth to Power." So, Dr. Watson, what inspired you to write this article? What was it?
I just the dynamics that were going on with the Tulsa Massacre of 1921. I mean, this was a centennial of it. And I mean, it was a tragedy. And it is something that largely, even apparently in Oklahoma history books, Oklahoma historians did not talk about and did not even know about themselves. And to me, the reaction toward the reparations dynamics has been, has sporadically occurred in our public discourse. Maybe the side that I heard so many people talking about, Tulsa and, the dynamics about, was this really true? I heard people saying, well, it probably wasn't as bad as they made it out to be. Like, enough said when you shouldn't even respond to something that dumb. It wasn't as bad. I mean, it was a pogrom. I mean, that was a pogrom. It was the equivalent to the pogroms in Russia in the late 18th century, which prompted a number of Jewish Americans to come to the United States, to escape the pogroms, because that was a pogrom. What happened in Tulsa, in the Greenwood district of Tulsa, on May 31st and June 1st of 1921 was a pogrom. Okay, that was a massacre. It wasn't a riot, it was a massacre, and it was a pogrom. And it was one of the worst acts of domestic terrorism this country has ever seen. So that prompted me to write it and to let people know what was behind the defensiveness of white fragility and the likes of it is due to the whites not wanting to know, or at least many whites, not wanting to acknowledge this nation's ugly and brutal history. They want to talk about things that unite us as opposed to divide us. Let's talk about the good things in American history. It's like, they're the ones claim about revisionist history. Well, guess what? They're trying to they have a very selective type of history. And when it deals with history in America, the reality is, I put in my piece, the history of America as it relates to race is raw, ruthless, and rocky. Okay. And it is not blue skies and apple pie. Okay. It is ugly. And therefore, if you want to talk about it honestly and directly and candidly, as some people on the right always say they want to be, they're against cancel culture and all these type of things, then don't be trying to cancel history. Okay. Then you got to keep it real and, like the title of my book, and tell it like it is.
Very strong, very strong. And as you started off, you said that a lot of white folks are trying not to, they want to have these conversations, or they want their monuments to stay up because they say, we need to respect history. I agree with you. Respecting history would also mean respecting and also listening to history doesn't make us look so good. History that reflects negatively about the country, but if it's factual, it's historical, it should be also mentioned and also recognized. My thing is, brother, Dr. Watson, a lot of people just didn't know about Tulsa. I was shocked. Were you shocked at the sheer number of people that were like learning it for the first time?
To be honest, no. I think because a lot of people the history's not taught in schools, and particularly like that, even history teachers themselves. A lot of times there were students in high school saying that a lot of teachers would gloss over slavery and areas like that in history, or they would try to, even justify slavery wasn't all that bad. And that's one of the essays in my book. You looked at there, I was like, it's like, I think it's chapter 17, notes to some conservatives, slavery is, I got the F word there, up. Okay. So, so to me, No, I think a lot of times when you got white teachers teaching history and history is very, I always tell people, look, anybody who wants to tell you history is objective, that's wrong. It's not. History is very subjective. It's subjective in the events that the events happen, but how you to interpret those events and write about them is up to you. I could write a book about Marcus Garvey. You could write a book about Marcus Garvey, and we could come to two totally different conclusions. It could be based on our life experience, our personal biases, and everything else. So history is very subjective. The term itself, his story, it's different than your story, her story, our story, their story. That's what the term comes from, his story. So yes, a lot of it's based on your personal life experience, your biases, and everything else. So don't ever believe anybody telling you history is objective. The only way it's objective is that the event happened. Now, how it happened and how you interpret it is up to you. So no, to get to your point, no, I'm not surprised that a lot of times that this is not taught, because a lot of times people talk about history, things to make them comfortable or things that they want to have. History, people, academics like anybody else are human and they have their own agendas. So yeah, I mean, something like Tulsa, something with that level of carnage and violence and, annihilation of people in the community and dehumanization and outright murdering people, it was something like that for a lot of white people, particularly if you're a person who has white fragility. You're not going to talk about that. No, why would you? That's something you don't want to talk about, because it basically forces you to look at the violence and and it shows white barbarian, white savagery. That's technically savagery is supposed to be something that's only relegated to black folks. White folks armed to the teeth and they're heroes when they go to war and fight. If a black person would do something like that, they would have reverted to their native, as James Baldwin said, they would have reverted to their native savagery. So to me, no, I'm not surprised at all that it was none of those, and not just Tulsa. I mean, Tulsa was not the only incident.
Right.
There was Rosewood, we know about. I mean, there was Wilmington in 1898. I mean, New York City in the 19th century. I mean, there are a whole bunch of other Tulsas and Rosewoods we probably don't even know about yet. I'm sure there are a lot more in this country. Okay, knowing this country's history, there have been a lot more. Trust me, I bet it's safe to say, and they'll be unearthed as time goes along. But Tulsa and Rosewood were probably not the only stories. Those are the ones who've gotten the most attention at this point. But I bet you there's dozens more.
And you're absolutely right, brother. I guess I should have phrased my question a little bit more, or my comment a little bit differently. I know when I was coming up, brother, we knew about the Million Man March. That was my time, young man during that time, and our focus was different. When I was coming up, man, I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. I read the book of Nat Turner. I mean, I just feel like things culturally were a little bit different for black folks anyway. I don't know about how white folks have operated within their own world, how history's been taught to them. But I can only imagine they want to cherry pick the most favorable historical moments, those that make them look shiny and clean and bright and patriotic is what they try to do.
Right.
Do you see that changing though for with the recent conversations? Because I noticed in your article you said that since Joe Biden gave this speech at Tulsa, first of all, the first time ever a president that I'm aware of, and maybe ever, you probably know better. First one?
Yes.
He's the first one. Okay. You said that you sort of applauded or you appreciated him for making these comments. So do you think that's going to open the consciousness, or has that given us an opportunity to have further conversation?
Yes, I think it has. But I also think too, it's also going to be more resistance from the right. I think it's giving people the opportunity to go ahead. And I think while it's important, as I've said, for presidents and things to make statements, we don't need to necessarily wait on presidents and other people. We've got to, because if that was the case, there'd been a lot of books that never been written. I wouldn't, if we wait on the president, the leaders and politicians to, address, historical injustices and things like that. We were waiting a long time, so I'm saying, so a lot of time, while I appreciate what President Biden has done, we need to also make efforts. I mean, the CBC, the Congressional Black Caucus, and, Black historians like myself and others, which I'm doing, and some of us are doing. We're the ones who also need to do the forefront of getting that. And we need to have cooperation of major media to bring these stories about and stuff as well. But yes, the leader, the president of the United States, is a powerful symbolic force. And a lot of times people take orders, people follow the leadership of the presidency. So yes, I think that is very, very important that he's doing that. But we also need to do our part as well.
That's true. I mean, I think it has to do with the platform that you get. Like, for instance, you wrote this great article. I don't know how many other platforms have brought you on to talk about this great article that sheds light on this. And the bigger the platform, the more awareness can be about the topics that you bring up, that you highlight in this article. And without that, it doesn't matter. And I've always thought, like, presidents, if even what they can't do as far as the executive order, they can use that bully pulpit because they have that microphone. We know that. They can't pretend now because we saw what Trump was able to do just by running his mouth, right? Yeah. He was able to destroy and tear down and fan flames and make these crazy comments that went viral. Well, my thing is presidents and all politicians can do similarly with a positive bent. They can do so positively by being bold, be as bold and audacious as Trump was, but for good, not for your own website or whatever he was doing it for.
Right, correct.
You pointed out something. I also want people to know, as you stated, Dr. Watson, this was not isolated. So I want to slow down for a second because I don't think the other incidents are really highlighted as much. And I'd like to take this opportunity to remind people. Now, I know you mentioned Rosewood. What were some of the other incidents of white mobs, massacres that you could also list?
Wilmington, North Carolina in 1898, New York City in 1863. There was a number of others, St. Louis in 1919. And 1919 was called the Red Summer because there were riots that took place all throughout the country, New York City, Chicago, and just very, very, ugly riots that took place, and they were just, the place. So, I mean, there are several cities, like I said, I just mentioned, St. Louis,
yes.
New York City, Chicago, New York, in addition to Rosewood and Wilmington, North Carolina, and a number, so they're just, and like I said, probably many, many other small towns or places we don't even know about yet.
The thing about that, thank you, Dr. Watson, for sharing that, is that you would think, because the common perception is it only happened down south. And you just named the Midwest. You just named the North. You know what I'm saying? You get where I'm going with this, Dr. Watson? Because
yes.
They're always picturing the most racist people in America always live down south. And I know you from Tennessee, right?
I'm in Tennessee now, from Delaware originally.
From Delaware, that's right, Delaware. So that's a little bit more.
Which is kind of half northern, half southern.
It's sort of like, not far from me, but you get where I'm going with this. So that's it's a misconception, as you described it, my brother.
I mean, the North, Midwest, Indiana had one of the strongest clans in the United States. I mean, the governor was, half the state legislature was in the Klan of Indiana. The Klan was so popular in Indiana, so strong, the Klan controlled the state government. The Klan was very popular in Maine in the 1920s. Now, there were no black folks in Maine to be prejudiced against, but they were prejudiced against French Canadians. Okay, so the Klan has taken on different dynamics depending upon the region of the country they were in. But no, you're right. Racism, we always have racism as being a Southern phenomenon. No, racism is universal. People, when they left the South and moved to a place like Oregon, the state of Oregon restricted this border to black folks. They couldn't even live in Oregon for a number of years, and the far West, there's definitely racism, has permeated its seeds all throughout the nation. It's not just certainly not a Southern phenomenon. We've seen that throughout history. Look at the Boston bus crisis. Boston's had a horrendous racial history. Philadelphia, Chicago. Look at some of the cities where racism has pretty much occurred in many ways. And one could argue the South has certainly had a horrible legacy of racism. In some ways, the South has probably in certain areas progressed farther than other parts of the nation because the South kind of had to deal with racism. They had to deal with it. You didn't have to deal with racism in Vermont. There were no black folks in Vermont of any significant number, or, North Dakota or South Dakota, but you had to deal with it in Alabama, Mississippi, Georgia, Florida. Some of those states are larger. The black population, well, Florida's kind of its own little entity, but but I'm saying, they had to kind of deal with, because the black populations in those states were just about as large as white. And that's why it was such much violence, oppression taking place in those states, because they realized, if they gave blacks the right to vote and everything else, they could start having black governors and things, black senators. And they did have some doing Reconstruction in those areas. But that's why that violence took place. There was the order of the populations. If you lived in Minnesota, you had, pockets of blacks in the state or whatever, but the reality was civil rights wasn't going to be a major issue to you. So it's easy for civil rights if you lived in Wyoming, and for civil rights if you lived in Montana. Not saying there weren't progressive people there certainly were. But the reality is that, it was much easier to be for something when it wasn't going to necessarily affect you directly or negatively anyway.
Right. Another point I'd like to point out or make note of is some people had the idea that these are just mobs of random people doing these things, but as in Tulsa, there were helicopters used or planes used to drop bombs. And if law enforcement wasn't actually engaged in it, they were damn sure complicit in some of these actions that were done. And no one was actually charged. No one was held accountable for these deaths, for these murders. And it just seems like when people, even when they do admit to this event and they have to address it, it's always dismissive, like, oh, just some random bad apples who committed these atrocities. What would you say to people with that type of excuse making, where they try to draw a circle around it and just point at a couple of toothless rednecks as the cause of a massacre?
I would say they're being intellectually dishonest and don't know what they're talking about, because it wasn't just rednecks out there in the Tulsa Massacre. It was businessmen, it was politicians, it was very VIPs of that community who actually took part in those violence. Okay, it was police officers themselves. So it was basically, a high level citizens of the community who were, considered well respected whites in Tulsa who took part in that massacre. Okay, and throughout history, racism has always had this perception, or some people do, a lot of whites, even right liberals who might be a little bit sanctimonious. There's this perception that racism are basically only confined to poor whites, like you said, the rednecks, or the big, bulgy, ignorant Southern sheriff, and those type of dynamics. And the reality is, racism, as I said earlier, is not just regional, and it's not just one socioeconomic class. Okay, we saw that when Martin Luther King Jr. went to Chicago in 1966, when he went to Cicero. Martin Luther King Jr. said in August, and he said he'd been in Mississippi and Alabama, and I'm quoting Dr. King. He said in his whole time and all the protests and issues that he has seen in Mississippi and Alabama, he never saw the level of hate that he saw in Chicago. That was Martin Luther King Jr. in August 1966, quoting what he said he saw and the level of hate that he saw in Chicago. So the point is, it is simply not there. And also, too, what you'll see is that the whites, historically speaking, poor whites largely have done the dirty work in many cases when it comes to the lynchings and the murders and that stuff. But rich whites were the ones who solidified it in state legislatures, because they were the ones who were in the state legislatures who solidified those segregationist laws and those anti-black laws and the Jim Crow and the grandfather clauses and other acts of oppressive sharecropping systems. They were the ones who solidified those in state legislatures. And even then, the rich whites and stuff, like, they didn't want to be associated with the Klan because they saw the Klan as white trash or not for them. So what they did was they created what you call the white citizens councils. They were the doctors and the lawyers and the professors, and they were I call it the cosmopolitan racism, the suits and ties and the polished fingernails, mostly suit and ties, but the wives had to come along with it. But the reality is, my point is that cosmopolitan racism was what you call the white citizens council in the South. So you had those as well. And they're the ones, like I said, who were just as committed to segregation and racism, but they were the ones that they didn't want to be associated with poor whites, but they still had the same agenda. And that was basically marginalizing blacks. So their methods may not have been seen as quite as maybe with the physical violence, but they wanted to do it through, de facto segregation and, basically implementing laws, that you segregated public schools and those things as well. So yes, rich whites and upper class whites have been just as active in maintaining segregation as well. And also, quite frankly, if rich whites had wanted liberal integration and stuff, it would have happened a long time ago, because they were the ones who had the power. So it was clear if it was only poor whites who wanted, segregation and those type of things, that would have been the end of it, because nobody would have cared what they thought. They could have been just, suppressed and things themselves. And the rich whites are the ones, who have maintained those social structures to maintain segregation.
Yes, institutional racism, systemic racism, embedded racism.
Systematic institutional racism. There you go.
Absolutely. They're the ones. I was telling folks that they typically see racism as some pissed off white lady in the parking lot of a Walmart yelling the N-word. And that's the one that goes viral. What doesn't seem to go as viral are the appraisers who undervalue black women's properties, forcing them to have to bring in white friends and pretend that they own the home instead of the black sister. What goes unnoticed are the racism that's embedded in healthcare, for instance, where people are not being treated, black people are not getting the same level of treatment. They're not being believed when they say they're in pain. Doctors are. But
look about that doctor who died because of that. Forget her name, just the name. You remember she died because she was saying she wasn't getting the kind. They didn't believe she was suffering treatment. There have been studies that say they feel that black people, that there are people who feel black people can withstand pain better than others. They feel like that. When they tried to, without that, in the South in the late 1970s, doctors would practice on black women. Without giving any kind of, pre-medication or anything like that as well, anesthetic and stuff as well. So yeah, within healthcare, certainly residential, educational disparities, environmental racism. Yes. That's there too as well. Those type of things are, they're certainly for real. And also too, you mentioned a good example about the word, they use the word to care and scream and stuff. I personally, I like the term Miss Ann, but Miss Ann was, the older folks used to use Miss Ann, but Karen's okay. But I think that the reality is that yes, I mean that's the kind of racism people tend to see. Like you said, the Karen screaming at somebody or yelling or harassing people. But the reality is, what about, like you said, the appraiser, maybe a white female appraiser who doesn't, a male appraiser who doesn't come in and like try to make your home $100,000 less than what it really was, and then the white friend comes in and looks at it, and then it goes up $150,000. That's the kind of example. That's racism. That's systematic racism. What about the woman who or the people when you submit resumes for a job and they see your name, if it sounds like Jamal or it sounds like Tamika or it sounds like that, then you don't get a call back or get a call. The University of Chicago, actually about 10 years ago, economists at the University of Chicago did a study. They made resumes and they put names, identical resumes, and where they put names, black names like Ebony, Jamal, Tamika on the resumes, and they put white names like maybe like Weston, Bianca, Tiffany or whatever, and those names like that. And actually on the white resumes, they purposely made mistakes. They had spelling mistakes and grammatical errors and stuff. And the white callers still got callbacks more than the blacks. They said it was clear that was an example of systemic racism right then and there. And also too, Hispanics, Hispanics got called back more than blacks, but still very, very seldom did they get a call. So the point is, if your name was like Julio or Juan or, Ricardo. So my point, I'm just saying to me, anybody tells you that, systematic racism does not exist, you're fooling yourself. And I think there was a generation of black people, millennials, I think, I'd say those born, between 77, although that's Gen X, 77 to about 92. I think there was a certain degree of denial among those group of blacks. I mean, I think it was not, I would say they kind of thought we had kind of gotten farther than we were. And I think they got a little disillusioned by certain, they would try to blow off acts of racism as maybe that's just an aberration. Like you said, it was an aberration. I think there was some denial, but I think the Obama years kind of woke up, and the Trump years definitely woke, I think, some of these kids, some of these people in that generation up, that, look, it's real. Racism is out here, okay? So don't, whatever, illusions you had about racism not existing and da-da-da,
Don't let HBO and Showtime and Netflix fool you. And
Exactly.
Don't let the NBA fool you or the NFL fool you. This is a reality. I think that's what happens. I think people see so many, they see the celebrities, Will Smith, Denzel Washington, Beyonce, they see them doing well, and they somehow, forget that that's an anomaly. That's
right. They say, how could this be happening in the age of Beyonce and Oprah and, LeBron James and, this is just simply not the case. And I said, well, those are 4 individuals, and I have nothing against those individuals. I think those individuals are very socially conscious individuals, and have certainly all those people we just mentioned have been very, very dedicated to the black community in their different ways. They've donated millions of dollars, to their own causes. Beyonce was her and Jay-Z donated money for the Ferguson cause, and Oprah's donated countless millions. I mean, to different schools, Morehouse, and places like that as well. LeBron James has been very socially active. I mean, and other black people who's a lot of celebrities, we know Donald Faison. He was on the show Scrubs, and he was on Clueless. He donated, millions of dollars to black. I mean, some people may not be as vocal about their activism, but they're still doing it. And I think as well, just because they're not out in the public, like Beyonce was saying herself in a song, simply because I'm not out and not on the ground in Ferguson doesn't mean I'm not concerned about Ferguson. That's a good point. But the reality is, there are also the reality is racism does exist, and those individuals alone simply cannot eradicate systematic racism.
No, and nor should we expect them to. And that's the other thing. A lot of times, out of frustration, I think it's a mind game that's been played on black folks where we're turning against one another for instances or for issues that are much bigger than us. I mean, the white middle class wouldn't exist without legislation that created the white middle class.
The GI Bill.
Exactly, or the New Deal.
You talk about affirmative action. That was a classic example of affirmative action. The GI Bill. So a lot of my professors, when I was going to grad school, a lot of them retired now. They're older. But my dad benefited from it. But he had, because of some discrimination, he had to go to HBCU at the time. But he went to Delaware State University, college at the time. But I'm saying, and he was able to move into the middle class as well. He put us in the middle class. But I'm saying that but there were a lot of the white boys growing up in farms in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, who otherwise would have never went to college if it wasn't for the GI Bill, and they said, paid for, at that time, paid for everything, So, I mean, that was a classic example of affirmative action, the GI Bill moving people into the middle class. You mentioned Roosevelt's New Deal program. Yeah, the New Deal program was good, and it was a godsend, because this country probably was going to, as Roosevelt said himself, this country, capitalism was, about to be destroyed, because people were very, very frustrated and we were going to embrace other areas and stuff as well. So, the New Deal pretty much saved capitalism. Now, those programs were designed for white folks. Black people could benefit from the tail end of them because Roosevelt himself didn't really necessarily care about black people. I mean, his wife, yes, she was more, a humanitarian, thing like that as well. And his kids, I think his kids were more, the life experience they had, I think, they were more, his mother, their mother put him in touch with people of color. So they had to, know who they were. But Roosevelt himself, he didn't, black people were not,
exactly.
Black reporters were barred from the White House and stuff like that as well. Anyway, I'm saying to me, the New Deal, yes, that was a good example. I mean, that was certainly, that was, I call those social programs, that was government, that was welfare. That was welfare. When you talk about welfare, I mean, it was welfare to save the nation. And then, the Great Society came along, which is an extension of the New Deal 30 years later with Lyndon Johnson. That created a whole new black middle class, and many people and stuff as well. And it helped a lot of poor whites, Medicaid, that was a 65 with Johnson. Lyndon Johnson was a very ruthless man. He knew politics. He worked for Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover. His response was, they asked, was he going to get rid of Hoover? And he said, hell no. He was a criminal. He goes, I'd rather have Hoover inside the tent pissing out than outside the tent pissing in. He said, Hoover might have stuff on me for all I know. And Hoover and him worked together because Hoover knew, Lyndon Johnson knew those people who were wife beaters or cheating on their wives or who were closet gay people and all this kind of, perverts like that as well. And Hoover gave him that information and he would use that stuff against them. He'd have lunch with certain people like say, let's you and I talk right now. Let's say you and I were having lunch. Okay, Senator Black, middle you'd be talking about your family and all that, about 25 minutes then during the lunch. He pull out some pictures of somebody who's not your wife. I got these from J. Edgar. I don't know where they came from and stuff like that, but I got this Medicaid bill coming up next week, or I got this farm stuff to do. Can I count on your support? And what you gonna say in 1965? Because otherwise, that got in the news, you gone. It's not like today, you gone. In 1965, you cheating on your wife, oh hell no, you're gone. I mean, so and he did that kind of stuff. He'd go to people's houses at 1 a.m, wake them up and say, the ones he didn't respect, you blankety blank, I know what you did. You better vote for this bill next week and da da da. I mean, people don't know how that stuff. That stuff came out in later books and stuff. But Lyndon Johnson was an arm twister, a blackmailer, and everything else. But he got a lot done for the nation because of it. Okay, I'm not saying the ends just well. Some people could argue the ends. In that case, maybe the ends justify the means. But the reality was politics. He was an old school politician. He got a lot of things done, and because he did that, because he, did what he had to do. So what I'm trying to say is that a lot of times, people who don't realize those kind of things, to get things done are it's very, very important that you so that you have to be a little more ruthless to get those things done. And Lyndon Johnson knew what politics was.
You got me thinking about Joe Biden. That's kind of what I expected Joe Biden to do, but instead I'm getting a lot of the parliamentarian. We got a parliamentarian, which I never heard of until 2020. I didn't even know we had a parliamentarian. I didn't know what that was. And now the parliamentarians all powerful, and now we got senators like West Virginia, one of the poorest states in the union or in the country.
Second poorest state in the country. Only Mississippi's poor.
There you go. And suddenly their senators now almost president. He's more powerful than Kamala Harris. So I
wonder if some of this is almost by design too. To be honest with you, I wonder if because a lot of these donors and things like that probably don't want their you got to realize these politicians are backed by donors and stuff too, and they probably don't want too many progressive policies. Right. So Manchin might be quote unquote the sacrificial lamb, and I think so I'm wondering. I know it sounds devious, but a lot of times politics, I wonder if they even are trying to get anything done. You know what I mean? Because these have been the most do nothing Congresses over the past decade I've ever seen. They spend more time fighting and arguing and everything else, and I wonder how much they really want to get done. I think they want to throw little crumbs to the public. It's like that, and they can blame the Democrats and Republicans, blame it. Well, they're not doing this. We could just do this, but they would do this, and we could do that, so they could just do that. So I mean, I just think to me, a lot of times I think a lot of that's just being. I wonder, how much they really, really want to get done. Because I think if they really want to get something done, they could get things done.
That's right. And they would do that arm twisting that you talked about and do some of that willing and dealing. I'd like to jump back to one point because you brought something up, brother, that I think I haven't heard any other show say. And that is, I think they prefer for us to talk about the currents or the Anns, Miss Anns, to distract us away from the structural racism. So that's why we see it all the time. Because people say, Tim, why are there so many instances of the Karens? And so we got it everywhere. There's racism everywhere. I'm like, yeah, but it's a certain type of racism that they're showing. The type of racism that make you think is isolated, that make you think it's just words, it's not actual, or maybe occasionally be somebody trying to go to a restaurant and someone won't let that person be served or something. But typically, it's just some innocuous person making a phone call. And I'm not saying that's not bad, that's not dangerous, but what is more dangerous are the redlining that's going on by the banks, or the way they structure highways through black neighborhoods and cut us off and separate the suburbs with a different tax base than the cities. And now the school systems are running off of, there you go, lack of a tax base for the school systems. So that's my theory. I don't know what you think, Dr. Watson. Go ahead, Dr. Watson.
No, it's a systemic, you're right. It's a systematic and systematic racism is far more dangerous, like Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. I mean, I compare that book, that's the academic Bible of the 21st century. That book is a classic. That's going to be a classic. That book was fantastic. She talks about the dynamic, the new Jim Crow and how, incarceration and redlining, all those issues that she brings out in that book that are very, very right on time. So yes, I mean, those are the things we get distracted about. Karens and social media can be very beneficial, to be sure, because they brought about Ferguson and things we would not have seen or been as aware of. And the social media can be a double-edged sword. It can be very, very beneficial, but it can also be problematic when people spend too much time on the negative things, like the Karen, like you said, who was maybe at the pool and yelling at somebody, or right. I guess they call it a Bob. It's for the guy, the Chuck, whatever his name, whatever they give for the man. But all those things. I'm not saying, like you said, it's not a bad thing, but no, we spend more time on that. I'm saying, as opposed like with the statues and stuff. I wrote a piece. Don't get too involved. That's not substitute symbolism for substance. For example, when they were talking about taking down these statues and everything else as well. I mean, yeah, look, do I think a Confederate flag should be hanging above a state house? No, absolutely not. There should be no Confederate flag hanging downtown on the town square, no matter where you were. There should not be swastikas hanging out down, no. But they should be put in museums, because that is a part of history. You don't erase history. You need to know your history. They need to be put in history and used and talked about. That being said, let's not get too wrapped up about Nathan Bedford Forrest, a statue downtown, all those kind of things. Yes, you can remove it, because these corporations came out after about a year ago, when all these, protests were happening and everything else after the George Floyd, as it should have happened, George Floyd's murder.
Right.
But, you have people, corporations and things like that, talking about donating $20 million here and there. So that's pennies for what those companies make. That's pennies for Pepsi and, Nabisco and Hershey's.
It's also a write-off as well.
Probably that too. And the reality is, what I'm saying is, okay, a statue might be removed from downtown. Okay, but what has happened there? I mean, okay, 8 months later, has things really gotten better for the community? No. What you want to do is focus on substance. I mean, my point is, have these companies, since, it does all in good to donate money, but have internship programs for college students. Make sure that there are going to be a number of people of color in entry-level positions when you get to Hershey. Make sure there's, mentoring programs for advancement, whether the company is. Those are things we need to be more concerned about. Donating money to the public schools and make sure that, or grocery stores in the community. Those are the type of things we want. Those are the kind of things I think we need to look at. And stuff. The symbolism, don't get me wrong, symbolism can be very powerful. Having a black president, like President Obama, was great. Having a black vice president, a biracial vice president like Camp, those things are very good, because they're inspiration to children and other people as well. Psychologically, it can be good. But let's not stop and rely on symbolism alone. Let's make sure we go beyond symbolism, because symbolism in of itself is just what it is. It's a symbol. You got to go beyond that. You got to make sure let's make sure we have substance.
Right. You need the symbolism to inspire, but then you need the functional things, the details done. You need the actual pathway to use that inspiration. There you go. Right. We need the roadblocks and the obstacles cleared so that you can inspire with it, use that inspiration and find a pathway in order to achieve those goals, brother.
Exactly.
Now that we're on this topic, brother, and I think you kind of highlighted about cancel culture. I think you said cancel culture. What do you think about lately? I've been hearing people say, oh, cancel culture is destroying America. It's destroying our way of communicating. It's destroying our way of people's free speech. What is your take on it historically, looking at it, because you're a professor of history. How is this, what do you think about this phenomenon called cancel culture? Because I don't think it existed before. Is it something new, or is it different, or what's your take?
To me, cancel culture is a red herring. It's like political correctness in the 90s. When political correctness came out, political correct. I was like, why is it political correct? One guy said one time, I said, I'm not interested in being politically correct. I'm just interested in being correct. And the reality is, a lot of that's just, it's designed for people who really want to. And you want to be careful with messing around with cancel culture, because a lot of times it plays into the hands of the right people who actually want to disrespect people, who want to, who want to be feel to disregard and see people as less than human. Cancel culture, to me, some people. The cancel culture started with the Me Too movement. And that's the term kind of came into being with the Me Too movement and stuff. and it kind of went with the race movement and stuff. Some of those people got canceled, probably should have been canceled. There were sexual harassers and things like that as well. I mean, so they were doing odious things. Then that's like the Harvey Weinstein, like that, they were canceled because of the things they had done. And I think to me that is just basically dismissing people and holding people accountable for their behavior. Cancel culture doesn't mean you can't speak your mind and those type of things as well. It's just, it's like this cancel culture saying if you cross the line. And if you misbehave, like any society, if you cross the line, you murder somebody, you're going to be prosecuted. Okay, if you rape somebody, you're going to be prosecuted. If you assault somebody, you're going to be arrested. So that's what I mean. That's anything else. Like that's what cancel culture means to me. If you cross the line, there'll be consequences. That's what it's saying to me. And I'm saying I don't see anything necessarily wrong with that. And how you define cancel culture, there are people look at it in different ways. There are people who feel that they're using it as they're trying to weaponize it to appeal to their audiences. And things as well. As well.
Yeah, I agree. There are things that you should be held accountable for. Everything you say can't be used against you in the public sphere. I mean,
exactly.
that's what we had, social media. I mean, I'm able to do something. I remember when I was coming up, Dr. Watson, of course, I wanted a radio show, but who could afford a radio? Who could afford the equipment in order to do a radio show? So now its accessibility is there, and anyone can start a radio show. And even if I could have started one, how do I get an audience? How do you build an audience? Well, look at us. We fast forward. We got social media. We're able to create audiences. We got over 150,000 people on YouTube, But with that comes scrutiny, right?
Yeah.
You got all these ears now, and guess what? Those people can talk back. Because those people have accounts and they have their own platforms. And maybe they may be smaller, but all of them put together will equal your platform. So,
and once you say something, my mother said one time, a pastor told her years ago, once you say something, your words become property of the world. So once you say something, that's it. You better get it, because once you say something, it's out there. And nowadays, more than ever, particularly with social media and courting, you can say, I didn't say it all I want, but I gotta go back in there and say, here it is. You said it. End of story.
You're right.
Yes,
once you say it, the world owns it. Yeah, I get it exactly. And sometimes I gotta tell myself that, because it's like I'll say something in a video, because I do a show out like 3-hour shows on Fridays, right? And I'll be talking because I'm by myself talking, and I got callers and I'm talking a lot, and there's no script. So I gotta always be cautious of what do I say, because in a moment you can say something. And later, people, it's memorialized. It's there forever. So, yes, with great freedom comes great responsibility as well. And I think sometimes people, with cancel culture, I'll just add this, and of course you can have the last comment on this, but I'll say intentions matter. And most reasonable people can tell when you're being malicious, right? And as opposed to when you are, talking and you mean really no harm and people take offense, because people can be offended by anything, right? But as long as they see it coming from a good place, most people who are fair players or not bad actors, good people who don't have an axe to grind, who aren't following an agenda, they typically give you a little bit of room.
And they're forgiving too. I mean, if you make something if you make a mistake, like the woman at Howard University when Kamala Harris, I think she was a journalist about a year ago, said her sorority sister screeched, and black people were like, "Oh no, girl, what are you saying?" Whatever. So she said in the Washington Post she made a mistake, and that was it. And they said she apologized, and that was it. It was a one-day story. She moved on. The problem is when people try to dig in their heels and say, they get defensive about. If you make a mistake, you make a mistake. I mean, that's the bottom line. Just say you made a mistake. Okay, I'm sorry, and be genuine in your apology and move on. I mean, and I think a lot of times the people who try to dig in their heels and try to justify and go back and forth, that makes the things worse, and it diminishes your credibility and your ethics and everything else. I mean, it's just like sometimes if you make a mistake, just say I made a mistake. I move on. It's like the person, if you bump into somebody on the street, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, and most people are gonna say, okay, no problem. But I didn't bump into you. What you talking about? I didn't bump into you. You bumped into me first. I mean, that's what I'm saying. You right. I'm trying to make. That's crazy. I mean, you just escalating something that you started for, because you were the one that fought at that. So I mean, people can be less forgiving and have less respect for that.
Yeah, absolutely, brother, absolutely. I want to talk about white fragility because, frankly, I've heard the term, but I like to hear your explanation or your definition of what white fragility actually is.
White fragility is the inability of whites to acknowledge racism or to come to grips with their own racism or want to hear hard, ugly truths about racism. That's what white fragility is. That's why the term fragile, a lot of times they don't want to talk about, they'll try to, shift the conversation or, like I said, try to, or just try to outright avoid talking about it, try to avoid reading about anything that makes them uncomfortable, is that degree of, discomfort that comes along with white fragility, or being also told, untruth. A lot of times white liberals sometimes want to feel good about themselves. So they have a sanctimonious. It was Terry McCullough who just won his primary, I think, the other day, a couple of years ago. He said, these reconciliation tables and stuff. He said, I'm not a big fan of those. He goes, that's just a bunch of white folks sitting around the table feeling good about themselves. This came from him. Terry McCullough said, he goes, there's just a bunch of white folks. And don't get me wrong, that's not saying that white folks don't, but people sitting around the table having, racial reconciliation commissions. All that stuff is good, but you're basically speaking to the converted. It used to be when I was in college and stuff, in grad school, come to the anti-racist forum and all those type of things, and to fight racism and all the kind. Look, I'm not saying those things were not done with good intentions, but the reality is you got well-meaning people sitting up there talking to each other. The racists are not going to come to those meetings. Probably the racists are not going to be in attendance. The people who really need to be there are not going to come. A racist is probably not going to come to an anti-racist forum. Okay, so a sexist is not going to come to an anti-sexist forum. A homophobic person is not going to come to anti-homophobia. Those people are probably not going to be there. So the reality is you're probably speaking to the converted. So you're going to have other areas that are going to be, and there's safe spaces on some level too. It's easier for people to talk about, well, I'm a liberal and that's good enough for me. And when somebody says, well, that's not good enough for me, what does that mean? And so white fragility can take on different, meanings. Because I think, because there are white people who are in denial about their racism. There are white liberals who feel that they're, liberal and their liberalism is enough. They don't have to do anything else. And there are some who don't want to be told that they are part of the problem and they maybe harbor, stereotypical things. They may not even have hard racist views, but they still have stereotypes, just like right wingers about black people. And when they're called out on it, then they get defensive. It was a show in the 70s called Mall. Did you ever? My mother used to watch. I was real little. I can't remember too well, but
yes.
Mall. Her name was Bea, and she was like a liberal woman, and she lived in Poughkeepsie, New York. But she was always, always had these liberal views, but she always got called. Norman Lear, who's still alive, now he's 97. To his credit, he would call out white liberals about their condescending behaviors. Norman Lear would call out white liberals. And, one time was a guy on there who was like a Gore Vidal character, and he was a gay character. Gore Vidal, the guy was gay. And Walter, her husband, was kind of like a more of a centrist, moderate guy. And before the show was over, the guy tells Maul, he goes, well, at least Walter doesn't like me because I'm a snob. He goes, the only reason you like me is because I'm gay. And then Maul had this kind of perplexed look on her face. She didn't know what to do. And there was another episode, there was a black woman who liked Andy Williams, and she liked Cole Porter and stuff like that. And Maul was like, you're black, you get your pride in your race. Don't you like black art? Da, da, da. And she goes, Mrs. Finley, simply because I'm a black woman doesn't mean I always have to like only black artists. And da 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 da. And the Maul would always have this cheesy look on her face when she got told off. But the point was, it was these kind of liberals who felt they were kind of paternalistic on some level and condescending. And Norman Lear did a very good job of calling out. That it wasn't every episode, but every now and then he would definitely let white liberals know. He would, he would call them out on what he saw as their paternalism and, in some cases condescending behavior. Because a lot of them have this kind of, we know what's best for you. What do you do for yourself?
Mm. Excellent points, brother. Some things I'd even forgotten about. But I think as far as fragility, what I see now, because I have an audience now, I don't know if you noticed, Dr. Watson, but my audience is somewhat diverse. I don't even like using that term, but because I don't go out looking for, give me a Latino, give me a black, give me a white, give me an Asian, give me an indigenous person. Like, whoever comes, shows up, I try to make everybody feel welcome.
It's racially pluralistic is what you're saying.
There you go. Thank you, brother. Thank you, brother. So, but having that in mind, only the most thick-skinned white folks can hang around, because I talk about race a lot. I mean, one of my people that I look up to is the late great Paul Mooney. So I don't cut, and Dick Gregory. So I don't cut corners, and I definitely talk about racial issues very boldly, and those folks who can't take it, man, it seems like I think they take it personal when we talk about race, as if they're the ones causing the ones that actually oppress black folks. And I always try to make people understand, typically what I'm talking about is systemic issues. I'm talking about what the government owes us. When we talk about reparations, I'm not talking about what you got to dig in your pocket and get. I'm talking about what these corporations need to do, and talking about what the government needs to do, because rights that were withheld from black folks systemically across the board. I mean, they had laws, they had practices that were implemented over periods of time. We're not talking about your individual paycheck, sir. I don't want your paycheck. I want your government to make compensation to repair damage that was done, the same way you would want the government to do if they tore down your house. The same way you would want the government to do.
Debating for reparations, I was like, what the heck is there to debate? I mean, if there's any group in this country that deserves compensation for the injustices they've dealt through, it's black folks, okay? The history of black folks in this America has been nothing but, rivers of blood, mountains of tears, and fields of sweat. Okay, my point is there's no group in this country that deserves compensation more than African Americans in this country. Okay, so yes, and reparations to me, I in my book you see my essay on it, but I think that it has varied aspects to it. I think Black people that are like 70 or older or whatever, they deserve direct monetary compensation. If they're 85 or older, they give them a direct monetary compensation. Black people beyond that, affirmative action programs, business development opportunities, like I said, corporation, entry-level job. There'll be all kind of ways. There's different ways you can do it, but I'd have more social programs, things like that as well. A Marshall Plan, to be honest, a Marshall Plan for our urban areas, rural areas, and inner cities. We need a Marshall Plan of sorts. But that's the reparation I would have for Black America under a certain age. But older Black people, I would say direct monetary compensation because they're not going to live long enough. As well. But I do think that reparations to me is a necessity in this country, and to me, it's not even up for debate. Okay, it shouldn't even be up for debate. Debate on how maybe those programs should be implemented, yes, but it's whether it should be given or not. No, that debate shouldn't even be on the table. We know they should be issued.
Well, that's a different take on it. I haven't heard it explained exactly that way as far as different ways. It's kind of creative to come up with different ways in which to compensate Black folks. But I know it's going to be some pushback for people in the audience because they want to cut that check. Cut the check. MLK was talking about it back in the 60s, and we got some of our folks here in the 2020s who can't even say cut the check now. That's very disheartening. But I do acknowledge that we have to be creative. We are living in a white country that's dominated by white folks.
I'm just saying to me, I think you want long-term reparations. The check, that's fine. If you want to if you're going to give every Black person in this country $6 or $7 million, that's all I do. But the reality is, you're going to cut that check. Cut the check is good, but you also want long-term reparations that last for generations, to make up for previous generations, and I think some things I mentioned, I think would have long-term, tangible, long-term, they would have longer-term consequences than just cut the check alone.
And that makes sense.
But I do think for older Black people of a certain age, just cut that check.
Yeah. I think both. I think both. You know what I'm saying? I had Dr. Sandy Dirty on the show several times, and Dr. Derek Hamilton, scholars I'm sure you're aware of. You're familiar with both of them. And I don't want to take up too much of your time, man, but you got so much here, man. Folks, Dr. Watson's got his book, Keeping It Real. You can pick this up. This is great. It's got a bunch of essays in here that are all topical, topics that evergreen topics that never go out of style. Of course, he's got his Substack. He's also got articles on Medium. You can find those as well. Just getting back to the article real quick, Dr. Watson talks about the fruits and rewards of the American dream like anybody else. Such fabricated false rhetoric drips with denial at the best and willful ignorance and intellectual dishonesty at worst. And it's perverse to blame the victim sort of argument that has little of any basis in reality. And what he's talking about there is how these folks who don't want to focus on race, but how they want to blame the victim. They want to say, well, things would be fine if you Black people just fill in the blank, pull up your pants. Things would be better if you Blacks would just not have babies out of wedlock. You Blacks would be better off if you turn down the music, or if you didn't listen to music, or like they just throw everything against the wall as if there aren't white people doing the same exact shit. Like it's so tiring. I love that section of the article. What made you write that particular passage?
Because that's the common knowledge of it. That's the common words where they say, Black folks would just do this and just do that. Well, there are millions of white folks who do these things all the damn time. Like if Black folks weren't just so dysfunctional, pathological. How do you account for all these dysfunctional white families that are prosperous economically? Their kids are in therapy and all these type of things as well. They have many pathologies. There are many working class Black families and poor families that are very, very stable, and single parents and people like that as well. They grow up, they're doing the best they can, and they're very probably just as functional and probably a lot less dysfunctional than some of these two-parent white families. Out of state and all these conservatives, these red states, and they talk about out of wedlock births and stuff. The fact is, out of wedlock births are higher in red states than they are in blue states. Okay, and poor whites have babies on the average just as much as poor working class Blacks. You know what I'm saying to me? So the point is, it's not just a Black thing. Pathologies. Look at the opioid crisis. That's another whole hour there. And the opioid crisis decimated certain towns in Ohio and northern New Hampshire, places like that as well. When Black folks, like Dave Chappelle said, and Joy-Ann Reid and others, when Black folks and Hispanics, it was their own behavior when they were dealing with drugs and the epidemic. Now all of a sudden, the opioid epidemic is decimating, and meth is decimating white communities. So we got to do something about this. It's like, whenever a white man kills somebody, they want to analyze it, or some kind of syndrome. They come with some kind of 13 or 14 letter fancy name for it, whatever. But what a black person does is murder. Murder is murder. Okay, he murdered. He was a mass murderer. That's what he was. Okay, just cut through chains to keep it real. But what a black person does is, or black or Hispanic, a person of color, he's a mass murderer. But what a white person does, they try to cut. Well, he was abused as a child. What was going on in his childhood? And he didn't. They always try to cut what he's got. They try to codify it, and you come up with these excuses. But like I said, it's like, but a black person, he was just, well, that's not to be shocked, because he or she's probably he's supposed to be violent anyway. But we want to, look at that guy who was Dylan Roof, who's got an essay in there about him. Shot a bunch of senior citizens in the church right there, and the cops had the nerve to take him to Burger King.
Yes.
Before he got arrested. Now, how many you think they would took a white black kid to Burger King? He was hungry, or KFC. I'm being flipping here when I say that. But I'm just saying, you think they would took him, got some lunch or dinner? Please, I don't think so.
No.
Like I said, and also with the U.S. Capitol, that's white privilege. These examples of white privilege. A black group of black folks, I'll put in my other pieces. A group of black people wouldn't have got anywhere near a state capitol, and brown people, let alone the U.S. Capitol,
right, and
got in and did some of the stuff they did. That's the first time a Confederate flag was ever, not even during the Civil War, did anybody bring a Confederate flag into the White House. To the Capitol. A Confederate flag was active. That was the first time in U.S. history that a Confederate flag was in the U.S. Capitol. Not even during the Civil War did it happen. And that means to show you right then and there, and got in there like that as well. And I'm saying, to me, there's no way in the world a group of black people had been blood of. They'd had helicopters from above shooting people and stuff. Like they talk about Tulsa. You'd have been more of a mass. They would have shot people. They wouldn't have got in there. There'd been rivers of blood through there, in that Capitol. So that's white privilege right then and there.
It is, and that brings up another point, man. Dr. Watson, man, you're a great talker, man. You're a great oratory. You got a lot of ability there. Because you keep bringing up point after point that I ain't even thought about talking with you about. But when you talk about, here's the problem I have, and maybe you can help me out, Dr. Watson. Mm-hmm. One of the things that I discover is a lot of people are pissed off the Democrats. I'm pissed off the Democrats too. I rail against the policies of the Democrats. I don't think they're doing it nearly as much as they could be doing to rectify problems in this country as it pertains to black people specifically. But overall, people that are working class people, if they miss a couple of checks, the lights go off. Those are the type of people that they have not been helping. And that's a problem. But my thing is this. Sometimes we get so pissed off at Democrats, man, we overlook. We start sounding like Republicans or conservatives who support Trump or something. Because, for instance, you just talked about the January 6th Commission. You just talked about what happened there with the insurrection, or whatever you want to call it, whatever title you prefer to use for it. And we have people saying, we need to just move on. We need to just move on from this. We have people on the left, people that consider themselves progressive, falling for Republican talking points about this. And I'm like sitting there going, hey, I'm not a friend of these do-nothing liberals, the do-nothing liberals. I'm not a friend of those. I'm not a booster for nonsense or for, how can I say, excuse me, this the inability to get things done where people just want to do incrementalism and nonsense and don't want to actually address black problems. But please, guys, this was serious business with this insurrection. Well, if that would have been black people, they would have never stopped talking about it. That shit would be talked about from now forever. Don't think that for a second, if it was a black organization that was in the Capitol, that they would not have had some type of commission. It would be all reversed. So
there would have been congressional hearings within a week. Okay,
that's my point. But let me get hold on, Watson. Let me get to the other point. So my thing is this, Dr. Watson. Have you noticed that some of us are making a mistake of defending the things we dislike because we're so aggrieved and bitter about what's not being done for black people?
Yes, that is true. And like you said, how on earth can you say these are people who tried to overturn an election? And it was sedition. That was treason. What happened on January 6th? That was an act of sedition. You tried to overthrow the government. Now, if you're going to say this is okay to move on from this, you're setting a very, very, very dangerous precedent. I'm telling you, because if you think basically what you're saying is you're giving a green light to people who ever want to overthrow the government. I don't think this could be the last act of something like this happening. This could happen again and again and again. So they better jump on it now, because this is not just because that happened on January 6th doesn't mean something like that could not happen again. Heaven forbid if it did. I hope it does not, but that doesn't mean it could not happen again. And talk about letting it go and move on. I mean, that you just give it the permission and green lights for people to enact the civil act of sedition.
Right. And even broader than that, just I think people they do an overcorrection. They're like, hey, we don't want to be misused by the Democratic Party. We don't want the Democrats offering us just platitudes and rhetoric. We want actual policies. So they're so upset that they overcorrect, and now you're almost basically lining up behind Republicans.
But what you got to do,
who don't want to do a damn thing for black people, right? Who are very dogmatic on doing anything. And so I'm like, the bottom line is people need to realize we don't really have a party. This is my opinion. Dr. Watson could speak for what his opinion is on this. I don't think black people truly have a party. Neither do poor people really have a party in this country. Do we really have a party for the working class or for working folks? I don't think we do. And we have to finally accept that, stop lining up with either team and just advocate for your people, your family, for your groups, and for legislation that makes your life better. What's your opinion on that, Dr. Watson?
Yes, I think to be honest with you, I think a third party in this country would probably be a very good idea. Because I think you're going to have that. I think it may very well come to that. I think 2024, I think the American public is restless. I just be candid with you. I think it's very restless, and I think there's something could happen in the next couple of years if things don't really change because the wealth gaps in this country and things like that. People are getting fed up. You got the working poor. I remember it used to be 25 years ago. Well, I only have $50 left, whatever, but I got all my bills paid and stuff. Now you got people who are working and can't even pay their bills. You got people going to work and can't pay their bills. And that's just absolutely, that should not be the case. Going to work and can't pay your bills, just working to be working. And I'm just saying, to me, you're seeing that, and I mean that like I said, in both parties, when it comes to the Democrat Republican Party, they're pretty similar in a lot of ways. I mean, they might have some fundamental differences about abortion and things like that as well, but both of them are in the pockets of Wall Street, and both of them in the pockets of, special interests and donors. I mean, there's not really too much that's going to really go on there, and they're not going to, that's what I'm saying, there are a lot of things they could really do. I mean, like, with working class people and students, like student loan forgiveness and all those type of things could really be beneficial. I mean, they could do, what that could do for the economy? I mean, about, getting rid of student loans, people buy homes, everything else. I mean, my philosophy is with the student loans, if they can bail out Wall Street bankers to the tune of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars, they certainly can bail out student loan borrowers, you know what I'm saying, to me. And I mean, that would be just, that would just do a lot for this country in many ways. And I think, so to me, it's just a matter of Joe Biden with the stroke of a pen, that could be an executive order. He could do that. And I noticed right after the election, people are like, you have all these articles, don't cancel student loan debt. Well, I was like, well, why not? I mean, right. So you bail out those Wall Street bankers, you can definitely cancel student loan debt. The other things they could do, student loan debt, like I said, certainly, job benefit, child care, and all those type of things are issues that those things need to be addressed. Because I think and I think as time goes along, they're going to be forced to be addressed, particularly as the demographics in this country change.
And to that point, brother, I've had some people push back on student loan debt forgiveness. And, Tim Black, don't you realize more white people go to college than black people? They were the ones who would benefit more from student loan debt. And I'm like, look, I'm not saying it would solely benefit black people, but it would benefit us disproportionately more because though they go to school more, we have more debt than them. We have more debt. We borrow more money than most white folks. I've looked at the figures. This is just a fact. Look it up. So. And black women owe more student debt than any other group. So it's not that these. I'm not saying that student debt forgiveness will resolve. I'm not saying it's a reparations for black people. It's not. But what it is, something similar to Medicaid for all or universal health care, we would disproportionately be impacted positively if we were able to get that done. It's not everything.
Going to those student loan payments could be going to house and mortgage payments, and it would help the economy and everything else. People going to, the economy would benefit, the society would benefit from it largely in general. So I don't care who's black or white. I mean, if it was only 10 black people that benefited from a student going to college. The reality is, wiping out the student loan debt for all those students, it would benefit the economy in general, and that would help black folks as well too. I mean, a strong economy eventually, even though we have systemic racism, black people might get the trickle in of it for the time being, but you still would benefit from a stronger economy. Right. You gotta look at the whole picture, not just focusing on who borrows more money.
I think it's also to their point. I think they're talking about the racial wealth gap, right? So they say, well, if white people benefit more, the gap is only going to widen. I understand that, but we still move up. Because what I'm looking at right now is just a widening still occurring without us getting any benefit, without black folks being, most of our equity, most of our wealth that we did have was tied up in our homes, which were, many people lost their homes under the Great Recession, 2008 and 2009. 7, 8, 9, something like that. So
and loan frauds, adjustable loan rates and stuff. Yeah,
there you go. Exactly.
Predatory loans, But the key is advancement. You look at you keep your eye on the prize, and the key is can you advance in that. As Ozzie Davis once said, we don't have permanent friends or permanent enemies in politics. You have permanent interest. Okay.
Boom. Kwame Brown is a basketball player. He used to play for the Lakers. He played for several other teams. He has become an internet phenomenon. He is everywhere. He's went at a number of people on a number of issues, and he was responding to some things that have been said about him over the last since the last 20 years. And what he's been doing is challenging the establishment or challenging sacred cows or popular pop culture icons, Stephen A. Smith, Charlamagne the God, various other people. Now, I don't expect you to chime into that, but one of the things I think he's doing that's very interesting, I'd like to get your response on, is he's saying that there's this go along to get along gang. Like, you have to be a part of a certain clique to be protected, or have to be part of a certain clique to get ahead in media and beyond within this country. I don't know if you're aware, Kwame Brown, are you having a comment on that topic?
I think there's a certain line that certain people promote. I think but I think that's for black or white. I don't think it's just black people. I think it's white people. I think that's in general. I think if you work for a certain news organization, you're gonna promote and espouse their talking points. Because that's what you're being paid for. That audience. Right now, we've been years ago, you had Walter Cronkite, CBS, and Tom Brokaw at NBC. You had different people. But the reality is now you've got media outlets that basically cater to an ideology. MSNBC caters toward a left wing ideology. Fox toward a right-wing ideology. Newsmax has their ideology. CNN tries to go down the middle. But I'm just saying, to me, the reality is that I think, working for these news organizations and stuff now, whether sports or whatever, they've got their audience pretty much is predominantly of one ideology, and they cater to that sentiment. So I think that's what's happening now. And I don't think that's just for black folks. I think that's for white folks and Asian folks and women and anybody else.
Yeah. I think he's also pointing to the fact that, and I agree with you, that an audience, they have to survive. They got demographics. They got an audience that they're trying to speak to. And to that audience, they try to create certain narratives that would be supported by that audience. And that's just how the business works. But to his point, he's saying some of these networks hire black people to go after black people just so that they don't have to do it. They hire a black face to carry out a white message.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
So to speak. So that's another thing. I think that's true. That's based in, I've seen that happen. And also, I try to catch myself because there are people, even in liberal circles, who want to just go after black people all day. Like, that's their thing, because they can't say it. They're like, oh, yeah, get them, Tim. So even when I feel that black people are wrong and they need to be checked, I have to also be worried or cautious that I'm not just going after black people, because that's what the numbers are. If I go after Kamala Harris, more hits. If I go after Joy Reid, I disagree with her, it's gonna reverberate across the internet. But if I talk about Joe Biden, if I talk about Mitch McConnell, So it's like it's an unwritten thing that I've noticed over the last 10 years of doing this, Dr. Watson. To Kwame's point, black people get used to go after black people in our media, and they get rewarded for it. Now, I don't get rewarded for it other than maybe a couple ads on one of my videos, but there are people collecting salaries to the tune of millions of dollars.
Well, you got the conservatives like Candace Owens and, Diamond and Silk and, a few other people, like I said, that they're, lesser knowns who, some try to be a little more sophisticated, John McWhorter on some level. I think that, those are people like that as well, Coleman Hughes, so there are definitely ones out there who are, but yeah, there are black people who do make money off black, particularly some black conservatives. I mean, they definitely, and some black liberals on some level, they're just more shrewd about it. But I'm saying to me, yes, but there are black people who do make money off, criticizing and denigrating and talking about black people. It's sad, but the reality is it can be a reality. That doesn't mean black folks like anybody else. None of us are above criticism, regardless of our race or who we are.
True.
But the reality is, but I think there are people who it's been profitable and lucrative for them to, denigrate and criticize their own people.
That's why you gotta go independent, man. That's why, and look, if you work for yourself, you get to make all these judgment calls. You get to decide who you're going to talk about. My biggest decisions are I get to decide what topics I cover. And like you pointed out earlier in the beginning of this interview, if we both see the same thing, we see the same incident. I forget the incident example you used, but we can both report on it differently because we're different people. We can take a different vantage point. So I decide the narrative that I want to portray in that video and in that content. And if you work for somebody, sorry, Johnson, you don't get to make that decision. You got editors, you got channel heads or directors, and yeah, it's tough. I'm also aware that some people trying to keep a job. I mean, people got families. Some of these people, and I don't know if Kwame knows this, and Kwame, these people, some of them are the major breadwinners of their entire households. I mean, would I like to see people make different ways, but I can understand, I'm a college professor, I'm tenured, it's like as well. But I'm saying, I was outspoken before I had tenure. I was, so I was always just who I am. I'm not wired to be submissive. But I think that, a lot of people have family support and everything else to it. I mean, I don't condone that kind of behavior. And I don't condone people bashing Black people to make money. I don't care what you do. You can find some other way to make a living. But I'm just saying, I understand why some people may not take a stance at a job or may not necessarily, put their neck out there because they got families and people to support. And I understand it, So I can but to that point, Dr. Watson, I think so. It's a catch-22 because it's also like, okay, so you take somebody who comes up, they're doing well. They may have their entire family, their entire clan. Everybody looking to them when they need their car fixed. I mean, the entire family is dependent on this one person who did well in the family, and now, and then they have these certain pressures at their job. I'm not saying I excuse them, but let's also recognize that Black people, based on racism, based on discrimination, based on segregation, based on slavery, have a specific. The opportunities are not there. Like they are for some others. You just talked about the study done at the Brookings Institute where they did the testing of the job applications.
The University of Chicago.
That's it, brother.
University of Chicago economists. Economists at the University of Chicago, they sent out resumes with Black sounding names, white sounding names, Hispanic sounding names.
Yeah. So so when we're having these critiques about these people that are not standing up, also recognize we ain't white folks in America who deciding to do this. We're Black folks from a disenfranchised set of people that are being backs against the wall. Some of them backs against the wall making these decisions. I don't condone it. I don't do it. I'm not defending them doing it. I'm independent. What I make fluctuates based on what kind of money I had. I don't pick up a salary. So I'm not defending that shit, but what I am saying is when you're being critical, also keep it real, and let's also talk about what makes Black people be in that position. Candace Owens was a liberal first. Don't forget she was a progressive. For years she was a progressive with a progressive message, and it went nowhere, Dr. Watson. She was nowhere. She did not get exposure until she started talking shit about Black people, became a conservative firebrand. And look at me, Tim Black, Dr. Watson. I'm the most popular Black commentator on the left, and I'm only at 150,000 subscribers. That would even resonate on the white side. Hold on, Dr. Watson. That would not even register on the scale if I was white. And I've had Dr. Cornel West on the show. I had Dr. Watson on the show. I had Dr. Sandy Dirty on the show, Dr. Derek Hamilton, foremost scholars in their fields on this show right here. Film directors Michael Moore, presidential candidates Andrew Yang, what's her name? I forget her name. I had a lot of people on the show. Congress people, sitting Congress people running for Congress, and I'm still at 150,000. So what I'm saying is we are Black. We carry that. There's a tax for being Black. Let's not leave that out when we're criticizing other Black people for not being brave, courageous, undaunting, Nat Turner, Dr. Martin Luther King. I don't know what you can respond to on that, but it's just something that you made me think about when you were talking.
I think when you're Black, you got to be. In America, the rules are different, and there's a very, very small margin of error that you're afforded, and you don't have those errors. You can't make those mistakes like white folks can over and over and over again in some cases, and you don't have that luxury to make too many mistakes. And I certainly say yes, there's a small margin of error for Black people, of any error at all, in some cases. So I understand that you have to be careful and how you proceed and how you decide to strike out, because it can make a difference.
Yes, it can. Yes, it can. And I don't know, how do we hold people accountable while accepting and recognizing all of those instances, recognizing everything I just said? How do we still hold them accountable, but still love them, but hold them accountable at the same time? That for me is the quandary that I face.
And it's an ongoing question for all of us. It's something we got to ponder. And I think we have to look at things from a case-by-case basis as well. So.
My brother, Dr. Watson, please tell people where to go to find out more about your work, like Keeping It Real and all your other articles that you write.
Thank you. Keeping It Real is published by the University of Chicago Press. You can get the book on Amazon. You can get it at the University of Chicago Press. and any major bookstores as well. You get any major bookstores as well. And I can be reached on Twitter as well. Like I said, Mr. Black, Brother Black said he's going to, show my Substack link and stuff as well. But you can get my book there. I'm also at East Tennessee State University, and I can be reached there as well. So all you have to do is type in Elwood Watson, East Tennessee State University, and my email address and everything will come up, and you can contact me there as well. I'm very open to speaking to others as well. So thanks again for having me on this program. I really appreciate it. And it's been really, really provocative and wonderful.
Yeah, man. Absolutely, brother. In closing, one quick question, brother. How did you feel about Dr. Cornel West not being able to make tenure, since you are also a professor who does have tenure? Did you have opinion about what he had to go through and how he had to switch universities in order to get tenure?
I thought it was absolutely ridiculous that anybody in this country, look, Cornel West should be tenured at any university in this country, probably in the world. I mean, there's no reason in the world with his background, his intellect, his publication skills. You know who he is. He's a known quantity. He's not somebody who's not known. I mean, Cornel West has written 19, 20 books or whatever, and bestsellers, and has been on numerous shows. I thought that was absolutely outrageous that they would not actually give him tenure. So he went to Union Theological Seminary, which is a very, very well-respected school, one of the best theological seminaries in the world. But to me, that shouldn't even been up for question. That should, in his case, that shouldn't even been up for question. He should have went with tenure from the get-go. But that's how they, that's another read. That's about white power and white, and systemic racism and things like that as well. Because I mean, do you think a white scholar of Cornel West's stature would have had to go without tenure? No. It would not have happened. So that's my answer to that.
Well, I'm glad I got your take on that, man, which I meant to. I had such a good time talking with you. When you mentioned your tenure, it popped in my head like, oh, I should ask him this question, because I think the audience would like to know. And from your perspective, you also being a professor is just right on point, man, for you to answer that question. But once again, man, thank you for everything, brother. Look, guys, I'm going to check the link description box below. Follow Dr. Watson. Support his work. We got to support each other, uplift each other. He's a provocative truth teller, man, and we need more like him. That's it. I'll see you on the next one. Peace.
Thank you. Peace.
Most news shows are suspect. They don't focus on Black issues, and when they do, it's all fluff. How does that help your life? How does that help your family? How does that help the culture? They don't. The Tim Black Show is different. Tim Black gives you news for people who can't stand the news. Real, authentic, researched, entertaining, on point. Don't let nobody take your cornbread. Visit www.timblacktv.com today. Get Black breaking news, politics, culture from someone you can trust. TimBlackTV.com. Join us today.